Nobody knew my secret. They saw me serving drinks and smiling at passengers. But when both pilots suddenly stopped breathing at 30,000 feet, I had only minutes to decide. Tell them the truth and risk everything, or let everyone die. The cockpit door was locked. Time was running out. And I was the only one who could fly. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The pre-dawn sky stretched beyond Jakarta's Soekarno-Hatta International Airport as I adjusted my navy blue uniform blazer. My name tag read, Maya Sarwono, Senior Flight Attendant, concealing the truth of who I had been 18 months earlier. The brass wings above my badge were standard flight attendant issue, nothing like the gold aviator wings I had worn as a commercial airline captain. Those wings sat in a drawer at home, a reminder of the life I lost when my medical certificate was suspended following viral encephalitis that affected my neurological function. The doctors assured me the condition was resolved, but aviation medical boards moved slowly. Meanwhile, my savings dwindled and my daughter's university tuition came due. Becoming a flight attendant was economic survival, a way to stay connected to aviation during my medical clearance limbo. My colleagues greeted me warmly as we prepared for Flight GA-771 to Singapore, a routine 3-hour journey. Captain Budi Santoso, a veteran with over 20,000 hours, nodded politely, treating me like any flight attendant, showing no recognition that I had once commanded Boeing 737-800s. First Officer Rini Kuzuma smiled while reviewing paperwork, seeing me as cabin crew rather than someone with 8,000 hours as pilot in command. I had deliberately kept my background quiet, unwilling to face awkward questions about why a captain now served beverages in economy class. The other flight attendants knew me as reliable Maya, unusually knowledgeable about aircraft systems but nothing more. Dewey, a cheerful junior attendant, chatted about weekend plans during galley inventory, unaware I could explain every aircraft system in technical detail. Anto, our male attendant, joked about difficult passengers, never imagining I had conducted countless emergency training sessions as a captain. Boarding began as 146 passengers filed aboard with the usual mixture of business travelers, families, and tourists. They treated me with polite courtesy, requesting overhead bin assistance, asking about meals, making casual conversation. A businessman in 12A ordered whiskey for cruising altitude. A young mother in 23C needed help with her toddler and requested extra blankets. An elderly couple asked about Singapore connections. None imagined the woman adjusting seat backs had commanded similar aircraft across international routes, making split-second decisions about weather diversions and mechanical emergencies. The cockpit door closed with its familiar thunk. Captain Santoso's calm voice welcomed passengers, providing standard flight information. First Officer Kuzuma followed with technical announcements. They worked with practiced coordination, trusting cabin crew to manage passenger service. Pushback proceeded normally. I secured the galley and took my jump seat for takeoff. The safety demonstration proceeded as Dewey showed oxygen masks and life vests. Engines spooled up, we accelerated down the runway, and rotation came smoothly. Jakarta's landscape fell away as we climbed through morning clouds toward cruising altitude. At 10,000 feet, I released my harness to start beverage service. The seatbelt signs remained on through bumpy air. Everything felt routine. Captain Santoso announced we'd reached cruising altitude at 10,000 meters, recommended keeping seatbelts fastened, and wished everyone a pleasant flight. The intercom clicked off. Dewey and I began beverage service, offering our limited selection. The businessman accepted his whiskey with a distracted nod. The young mother requested apple juice and coffee. An elderly gentleman asked detailed questions before selecting a sandwich. I responded professionally, my mind on autopilot while some deeper consciousness remained attuned to the aircraft's sounds and sensations. 40 minutes into the flight, during second beverage service, I noticed something wrong. Nothing obvious suggested problems, engine noise was consistent, cabin pressure stable, yet some instinct sharpened my awareness. The background hum that experienced pilots learned to monitor subconsciously had shifted in some indefinable way. Years of flying had trained my nervous system to detect anomalies that conscious analysis might miss, a sixth sense developed through thousands of hours of listening to aircraft systems and feeling their rhythms through the airframe. Dewey continued chatting with passengers, oblivious. I saw nothing amiss among the 146 people whose safety depended on two pilots behind the cockpit door. I went forward to check with the cockpit via intercom, a routine communication. The handset felt familiar in my grip as I lifted it, my thumb finding the call button automatically. I pressed expecting Captain Santoso's voice. Instead, only silence, not even background cockpit noise. The absence of sound felt wrong in ways I struggled to articulate. Every cockpit produced ambient noise, the whisper of air conditioning, the murmur of radio transmissions, the subtle electronic tones of automated systems. Complete silence suggested either catastrophic electrical failure or something preventing normal flight deck operations. I tried again, speaking clearly and requesting status confirmation. Again, absolute silence. My concern elevated from curiosity to alarm as adrenaline began trickling into my bloodstream. Third attempt, now urgent, requesting either pilot acknowledge. The heavy silence felt wrong, almost malevolent in its completeness. Dewey noticed my expression and came forward, asking what was happening. I explained calmly that the cockpit wasn't responding, trying to keep my voice steady while my mind raced through possible explanations. She suggested maybe the intercom malfunctioned, offering the rational explanation I wanted to believe. I wanted to accept that simple technical glitch, but aviation experience told me redundant systems rarely failed completely. Modern aircraft had multiple communication pathways precisely to prevent situations where crew members couldn't contact each other. The probability of simultaneous failure across all systems was vanishingly small, which meant the silence probably indicated something far more serious than equipment malfunction. I used the emergency buzzer, pressing the pattern indicating priority communication. The button felt small and inadequate under my finger, a tiny piece of plastic separating us from understanding what was happening behind that reinforced door. No response through the door, no acknowledgement, no movement sounds. I tried again, holding longer, pressing my ear against the door. The cool metal against my skin transmitted vibrations from the aircraft structure but nothing beyond soundproofing, no voices, alarms, or radio chatter. Just terrifying silence where there should have been constant activity of pilots managing flight at altitude. Anto appeared, drawn by our worried expressions, asking what was wrong. I explained we couldn't contact the flight deck despite multiple emergency attempts. His face paled. He asked what to do, looking to me for guidance. The weight of 146 lives pressed against my consciousness. I retrieved the emergency manual, finding procedures inadequate for our situation. Continue contact attempts, check for external causes, monitor for decompression, none addressed our fundamental problem. The reinforced door protecting us from hijackers now prevented us from potentially saving the aircraft. Dewey asked about informing passengers. I said firmly we wouldn't create panic until we'd exhausted all options. Anto suggested contacting air traffic control somehow. I explained we had no cabin radio access. We were isolated at 10,000 meters, unable to communicate our emergency or determine pilot status. I checked outside, engines running normally, wings undamaged, altitude stable. The aircraft flew smoothly. Everything appeared normal except the terrifying fact that the two people flying us weren't responding. The horrible possibility formed, we might be a ghost ship, flying on autopilot with unconscious pilots while 146 people had no idea of potential doom. I considered scenarios rendering both pilots unconscious simultaneously: decompression, carbon monoxide, electrical fumes, catastrophic medical events. The aircraft's stable flight suggested autopilot remained engaged, meaning we might fly normally until fuel exhaustion and uncontrolled ocean descent. I pulled Dewey and Anto aside, speaking low. We faced potential catastrophe and needed to consider options carefully. Their eyes widened with fear as reality penetrated. I explained aviation regulations provided emergency cockpit access when pilots were believed incapacitated and safety required intervention. The emergency code would override the lock, though conscious pilots could prevent entry. We needed to attempt access and hope lack of response meant inability rather than choice. Dewey asked what we'd do if we accessed the cockpit. I hesitated before revealing my hidden truth. Looking at their frightened faces and thinking of 146 lives, I told them quietly I was a commercial airline captain with 8,000 flight hours who could fly this aircraft. Their expressions shifted from fear to confusion to hope. Anto asked why I worked as a flight attendant if I was a qualified captain. I gave abbreviated explanation about medical certificate suspension and economic necessity. We could discuss details later if we survived. I retrieved emergency access information and reviewed cockpit breach procedures. Enter the code, triggering a 30-second warning inside. Conscious pilots could prevent opening if they deemed it a security threat. If no action, the door unlocks automatically. Our situation represented exactly what the system designed for. I instructed Dewey and Anto to block passenger view and prepare a cover story. They positioned themselves professionally. I approached the keypad and entered the code, watching the light shift to amber as 30 seconds began. My heart pounded. 15 seconds, 20, 25, the door remained locked, no pilot response. At 30 seconds, the lock clicked and disengaged. No one inside had prevented access. I pushed slowly, not knowing what I'd find but fearing the worst. The door swung open with surprising ease given its reinforced construction, revealing the flight deck in the harsh illumination of instrument panels and overhead lights. The sight that greeted me confirmed my worst fears in a single horrifying glance. Captain Santoso slumped in the left seat, head forward, arms hanging, completely unconscious. His hands had fallen away from the controls, fingers curled slightly as though he had been reaching for something when consciousness fled. First Officer Kuzuma collapsed against her window, body contorted awkwardly, hand near radio controls as though trying to communicate when whatever struck her hit. Her headset had slipped partially off, hanging at an odd angle that spoke of sudden incapacitation rather than deliberate removal. The scene spoke volumes about how rapidly the emergency had developed. Both pilots showed signs of having been actively working moments before losing consciousness. Captain Santoso's flight management computer displayed a partially entered waypoint, suggesting he had been in the middle of navigation tasks when affected. First Officer Kuzuma's hand position near the radio suggested she might have been attempting to report their deteriorating condition to air traffic control before succumbing. The cockpit's disarray told a story of pilots fighting against an invisible enemy, struggling to maintain control even as their cognitive functions degraded, ultimately losing the battle before they could complete distress calls or activate emergency systems that might have alerted the outside world to their predicament. Instruments showed autopilot engaged, course and altitude steady. The automation was doing exactly what designers had intended, maintaining programmed flight parameters regardless of pilot consciousness. The radio emitted periodic Jakarta air traffic control calls, increasingly urgent tones suggesting long unanswered attempts. I could hear the controller's voice shifting from routine to concerned to genuinely worried as his calls went unanswered. Alarm lights indicated multiple missed communications, the flight management system faithfully logging each attempted contact that had received no response. The emergency transponder wasn't activated, meaning no distress signal had been transmitted to alert controllers that something was catastrophically wrong aboard this aircraft. The scene spoke of sudden catastrophic incapacitation leaving them unable to summon help, a silent emergency unfolding at 10,000 meters while the world below remained completely unaware that 146 lives hung in the balance. I checked both pilots, strong pulses, breathing regularly, but no response. Deeply unconscious, suggesting poisoning or medical event rather than trauma. Cabin altitude showed normal pressure, ruling out hypoxia. No unusual odor suggesting carbon monoxide or fire. Whatever incapacitated them remained mysterious but hadn't affected me, suggesting localized flight deck contamination or medical coincidence. Priority was taking control and establishing communication before our silence triggered emergency responses. I slid into the left seat and secured the harness, hands moving across familiar controls with muscle memory despite 18 months away. The 737-800 showed normal operation, engine smooth, fuel adequate, hydraulics and electrical functioning. Autopilot maintained heading and altitude precisely. I disconnected autopilot, making small adjustments to confirm controls functioned normally. Familiar resistance confirmed full manual control. I re-engaged autopilot after verification. Dewey appeared in the doorway, wide-eyed, struggling to reconcile this image with the flight attendant she'd known. I told her both pilots were unconscious but alive, and I needed her to move them for medical attention. Anto joined and together they extracted Captain Santoso, struggling with weight and cockpit geometry but eventually maneuvering him to the galley. Passenger voices rose in alarm seeing the unconscious pilot. I knew panic would spread quickly. They returned for First Officer Kazuma, working faster as passenger awareness grew and questions multiplied. With pilots removed, I took the captain's seat fully and adjusted position. I reached for the radio and selected Jakarta frequency, knowing they'd been trying to contact us. I pressed transmit and identified the aircraft, reporting medical emergency affecting both pilots and command assumed by qualified flight crew. The controller's relieved response came immediately, requesting details. I explained both pilots unconscious from unknown causes but alive, that I was a qualified captain currently working as flight attendant but fully capable, and intended diverting to nearest suitable airport. He acknowledged and began coordinating emergency response, asking souls aboard, fuel, and aircraft controllability. I provided information professionally, falling back into command communication style. His rapid-fire questions gathered information for emergency services and I answered while scanning instruments. The controller advised Singapore Changi was closest, recommended continuing current heading while coordinating priority landing. I confirmed and requested medical personnel for 2 unconscious patients requiring evaluation for possible poisoning. He acknowledged, alerting emergency services, then asked if I needed operation assistance. I said I was fully qualified on type and required only priority handling and medical support. Behind me the cabin erupted as passengers processed information that both pilots were unconscious. Dewey tried maintaining order, but panic fed itself. Someone shouted a flight attendant was flying and they'd all die. Others demanded explanations. Fear and anger penetrated the cockpit. I picked up the PA microphone and keyed it, my voice echoing with command authority. I told passengers I was Captain Maya Sarwono, a qualified commercial captain with 8,000 flight hours currently working as flight attendant due to medical certification issues, that I had full aircraft control and would execute emergency landing at Singapore within 30 minutes. Both original pilots were unconscious but stable, all systems functioning normally, and I needed everyone seated following attendant instructions for safe landing of all 146 people. Cabin noise shifted from panic to confusion as passengers reconciled the beverage-serving flight attendant with a commanding captain. Questions continued but at lower volume, my announcement providing enough information to reduce immediate hysteria. Singapore Control contacted me, confirming emergency notification, requesting position, altitude, and estimated time. I provided information and requested priority clearance with emergency services standing by. The controller was calm and professional, vectoring traffic away, treating me exactly as any pilot executing emergency diversion. He asked about fuel and special assistance needs. I said adequate fuel for normal approach, needed only priority handling and medical support. I began descending and reducing speed for Changi approach, executing procedures smoothly despite my absence. Automation assisted navigation but I maintained manual throttle control, verifying each step personally. Descent rate felt controlled, aircraft responding predictably. Looking outside, I saw a coastline ahead where we'd cross into Singaporean airspace. Anto reported both pilots remained unconscious but stable, regular breathing, strong pulses, no wake response. He asked about medical intervention. I said keep them comfortable and monitor vitals but don't attempt aggressive action without guidance since we didn't know the cause. Both affected simultaneously suggested environmental contamination confined to the cockpit. I noted investigators should seal the flight deck immediately to preserve evidence. Singapore approach provided heading and altitude for straight-in approach to runway 02C, their longest and best equipped for emergencies. I acknowledged and executed turns smoothly, maintaining precise control despite pressure. Controller asked about declaring full emergency or priority medical diversion. I said full emergency, unconscious crew, unknown contamination, over 140 passengers whose families deserved every precaution. Autopilot captured final approach course, tracking localizer toward runway. I monitored performance and prepared for manual control if needed. Dewey secured cabin, verified passengers seated and belted, took her jump seat and gave thumbs up. I saw Changi ahead, runways clear in sunshine, emergency vehicles positioning. Those flashing lights made reality tangible, we weren't safely down yet. I disconnected autopilot at 500 feet and took manual control, feeling the aircraft respond, remembering countless similar approaches. Runway grew larger as we descended. At 50 feet I began flare, pulling back gently to arrest descent and position for touchdown. Main wheels contacted with firm but controlled thump. I deployed thrust reversers and applied brakes, decelerating quickly. Emergency vehicles followed us down the runway, lights flashing, crews ready. I turned off at first taxiway and stopped as directed, setting parking brake and shutting down engines per emergency procedures. Sudden silence after engine noise felt profound, marking transition from flying aircraft to disabled aircraft awaiting assistance. Medical personnel boarded immediately, equipment ready. They assessed the unconscious pilots while asking about timing, symptoms, and exposure. I explained simultaneous loss of consciousness and timeline, emphasizing both affected while cabin showed no symptoms. The team leader requested cockpit sealing until environmental testing could check contamination. Airport officials boarded, requesting my license and medical certificate, trying to understand a flight attendant commanding commercial aircraft with 146 passengers. I explained my background, showed my captain's license that I still carried despite suspension, provided airline and medical authority contacts. They asked detailed questions about my decision to access cockpit and assume command. I explained emergency protocols authorizing such action when pilots incapacitated and safety required intervention by qualified crew. Passengers deplaned through mobile stairs, many stopping to thank me as they passed the cockpit. The businessman from 12A shook my hand, grateful I'd been aboard with needed skills. The young mother said I was a hero, her family owed me their lives. The elderly couple thanked me tearfully, saying they'd been terrified but my calm announcement helped them stay composed. Their gratitude felt overwhelming, reminding me why I'd become a pilot and why losing my certificate had felt like losing part of my identity. Dewey and Anto approached as the last passengers left, both emotionally drained but proud and relieved. Dewey hugged me, saying she couldn't believe I'd kept my background secret so long. Anto shook my hand formally, voice shaking slightly as he said he'd never doubted I'd get everyone down safely. I thanked them for support and professionalism, telling them their calm passenger management prevented panic that could have complicated the landing. The airline dispatched management to Singapore for debriefing and investigation support. The chief pilot requested detailed account of my actions, taking notes as I explained the timeline. He asked about my current medical status and clearance for flying duties. I explained I was in final recertification stages but hadn't received approval yet. He noted my actions clearly demonstrated sound skills and judgment despite medical interruption, which should support license restoration. Environmental testing revealed elevated carbon monoxide from a defective heating system gasket allowing engine exhaust into flight deck air. Contamination was gradual, affecting only cockpit because cabin air came separately, explaining pilot unconsciousness while cabin remained unaffected. The defect escaped routine maintenance but sustained altitude exposure overcame both pilots before they realized what was happening. Investigators praised my cockpit access decision, noting without intervention the autopilot would eventually have crashed with total loss of life. Media coverage was extensive, News outlets worldwide reported the flight attendant with hidden pilot expertise who saved 146 lives. Reporters requested interviews, trying to frame it as heroic miracle or damning indictment of airline practices allowing captains to work as flight attendants. I declined most interviews, issuing a brief statement explaining my circumstances and emphasizing my actions were simply professional training applied to emergency requiring those specific skills. Captain Santoso and First Officer Kuzuma recovered fully after hyperbaric oxygen treatment clearing carbon monoxide, though both expressed embarrassment at not recognizing symptoms before losing consciousness. Captain Santoso visited me in Singapore, thanking me for saving his life and everyone aboard, saying he'd felt increasingly tired and confused but attributed it to fatigue rather than poisoning. First Officer Kuzuma sent a letter expressing similar gratitude, noting my experience demonstrated why airlines should retain qualified pilots even when medical issues temporarily prevented active certificates. The publicity accelerated my medical recertification as authorities reviewed the incident and recognized my performance-validated technical competence and decision-making capability. The medical board scheduled additional evaluations but anticipated approving my flight status return given demonstrated neurological function recovery. My airline offered to restore me to flight deck once medical clearance came, acknowledging they'd moved too quickly accepting my resignation when my certificate first suspended, offering to restore seniority and captain status. 3 months later, I received my medical certificate with full reinstatement and no restrictions, officially clearing me for commercial flying as pilot in command. My airline assigned recurrent training and line checks to verify proficiency after 18 months away. Simulator sessions felt comfortable, my hands moving across controls with practiced efficiency, my mind processing emergencies with calm analytical approach that had served me well. My first flight back was the same Jakarta to Singapore route where I'd executed the emergency landing as flight attendant, though this time I wore four-stripe captain's uniform and sat in cockpit from the beginning. The chief pilot rode as observer to verify performance, though he spent most of the flight reading while I flew with the same competence characterizing my career before medical interruption. Landing at Changi felt symbolic, bringing my journey full circle on the same runway where I'd saved 146 lives. Flight attendants on my first reinstated flight included Dewey, who requested assignment because she wanted to see me back where I belonged. She served coffee while I flew, both smiling at the role reversal and unlikely journey from casual colleagues to emergency team to friends bonded by shared crisis. During descent she came to the cockpit door and looked in at me in the captain's chair, giving thumbs up and a smile acknowledging everything we'd experienced when the cockpit went silent and I transformed from flight attendant to commanding pilot. The Boeing 737-800 lifted off smoothly from Jakarta and climbed through clouds toward cruising altitude, familiar sensations feeling like coming home after long absence. My first officer was capable and respectful of my experience without being intimidated by recent notoriety. We worked with practice coordination, managing the aircraft through normal procedures representing the vast majority of commercial aviation operations. Looking back on those 18 months as flight attendant, I recognized the experience gave me perspectives I'd never have developed remaining exclusively in the flight deck. Understanding cabin crew challenges, seeing how passengers experienced flights, and recognizing the crucial safety role flight attendants played in emergencies made me a better captain with more comprehensive aviation ecosystem awareness. The emergency landing validated my decision to stay connected to aviation even when my certificate was suspended, proving skills and expertise retained value even when circumstances prevented immediate application. Captain Santoso contacted me occasionally, sharing recovery updates, our shared experience creating a bond despite unusual circumstances. He'd recommended changes to cockpit air monitoring systems that would alert pilots to carbon monoxide before dangerous levels, hoping future crews wouldn't face the same silent danger. His advocacy represented positive outcomes emerging from terrifying incidents when professionals learned from experience and worked to prevent recurrence. The 146 passengers remained scattered worldwide, most probably never thinking about their unusual Jakarta to Singapore journey unless reminded by news reports. A few reached out through social media expressing gratitude and sharing how the incident affected their perspectives on life, risk, and invisible expertise emerging in crisis. Their messages reminded me my actions rippled through 146 lives and everyone connected to them. Flying the Singapore route now as reinstated captain, I occasionally thought about those desperate moments sitting in this seat with unconscious pilots behind me and terrified passengers in cabin, making decisions determining whether 146 people lived or died. The memory never completely faded but transformed from raw terror into professional experience, informing my approach to command and emergency preparedness. Every flight represented new opportunities for challenges requiring the combination of technical skill, judgment, and calm leadership, separating adequate pilots from exceptional ones. The aviation industry continued its endless cycle of flights, emergencies, investigations, and improvements. My emergency landing entered the statistical database alongside thousands of other incidents, providing information for analysts studying pilot incapacitation, cockpit contamination, and emergency decision-making. Lessons learned would influence training programs, equipment specifications, and regulatory requirements, preventing similar situations. The weeks following my reinstatement brought unexpected opportunities and challenges I had never anticipated during those dark months working as a flight attendant. Aviation safety organizations invited me to speak at conferences about crew resource management and the importance of maintaining professional competency even during career interruptions. Standing before audiences of pilots, flight attendants, and safety investigators felt surreal as I recounted those terrifying minutes when everything I had learned over 12 years of flying had been tested in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The questions came rapid fire from professionals who wanted to understand how I had maintained my skills during 18 months away from the flight deck, how I had recognized the emergency so quickly, and what training improvements could help other crews prepare for similar situations. My airline began revising their policies regarding pilots with suspended medical certificates, recognizing that my case demonstrated the value of keeping qualified aviators connected to aviation even when temporary medical issues prevented them from holding active flight status. The new procedures would allow medically grounded pilots to work in ground training, flight dispatch, or yes, even as flight attendants, while maintaining their technical knowledge and aviation awareness. Several other pilots who had been forced into early retirement or career changes due to medical issues contacted me privately, thanking me for demonstrating that temporary setbacks did not have to mean permanent loss of expertise or professional identity. Their stories revealed a hidden population of qualified aviators whose skills and experience had been lost to the industry through circumstances beyond their control. Dewey's perspective on her own career path shifted dramatically after experiencing the emergency landing firsthand. She began taking additional aviation courses and expressed interest in potentially pursuing pilot training herself, saying that watching me command the aircraft during those critical moments had shown her that flight attendants could possess capabilities far beyond passenger service. I encouraged her ambitions and connected her with training resources, remembering how my own journey into aviation had begun with similar inspiration from a captain I had admired early in my career. The possibility that my emergency actions might inspire the next generation of pilots added unexpected meaning to an experience that had been purely about survival in the moment. The passengers from that flight formed an informal support group on social media, connecting with each other to share their experiences and process the trauma of believing they might die before my announcement revealed that a qualified pilot was in command. Reading their posts gave me insight into how the emergency had affected people whose perspectives I had not considered during those intense minutes of crisis management. A businessman wrote about how the incident had prompted him to repair his relationship with his estranged daughter, realizing that life was too short for unresolved conflicts. The young mother posted photographs of her toddler's birthday party with a caption thanking me for ensuring her child would grow up with a mother. An elderly man shared that he had been flying to Singapore for experimental cancer treatment and that surviving the emergency landing had given him renewed determination to fight his illness. Their testimonies revealed layers of human impact I had never considered while focused on the technical aspects of flying the aircraft and managing the emergency landing. Each passenger had boarded that flight carrying their own stories, dreams, fears, and responsibilities. The businessman had been traveling to close a deal that would secure his company's future and protect his employees' jobs. The young mother had been taking her daughter to visit grandparents who had never met their granddaughter. A university student had been heading to an important scholarship interview that could change her entire future. A nurse was traveling to provide care for her aging father. Behind every seat number was a complete human life with connections spreading out to family, friends, colleagues, and communities who would have been devastated by catastrophic loss. The weight of that responsibility sometimes overwhelmed me when I allowed myself to contemplate it fully. 146 lives, plus all the people connected to those lives, had depended on decisions I made in moments of extreme pressure. A single mistake, a moment of hesitation, an error in judgment, and dozens of families would have been shattered. Children would have grown up without parents. Parents would have buried children. The ripple effects of failure would have spread through communities in ways impossible to quantify or imagine. Technical investigators from Boeing contacted me requesting detailed information about aircraft systems behavior during the emergency, particularly interested in how the autopilot had performed during the extended period with unconscious pilots. My observations about the aircraft's stability and the automation's reliable performance contributed to ongoing research into autonomous flight systems and emergency backup procedures. The engineers explained that future aircraft designs would incorporate additional safeguards based partly on lessons learned from incidents like ours, including enhanced cockpit air quality monitoring and automated distress signaling when pilots became unresponsive. Knowing that my terrifying experience would contribute to making future flights safer provided some sense of purpose to what had felt like pure chaos in the moment. Captain Santoso returned to flying 6 months after the incident, having undergone extensive medical evaluation and additional training to ensure he had fully recovered from the carbon monoxide exposure. His first flight back was deliberately scheduled as a Singapore run with me as the other captain on a different aircraft departing around the same time, creating an unspoken bond as we both pushed back from Jakarta gates and climbed out over the Java Sea. He radioed me on the company frequency once we were both at cruising altitude, his voice warm and genuine as he thanked me again for saving his life and said he was honored to share the sky with me. The simple gesture of professional respect from a pilot I had rescued meant more than any award or media recognition possibly could. First Officer Kuzuma advanced to captain faster than expected, partly due to the airline's recognition that she had demonstrated excellent decision-making and preparation leading up to the emergency even though the carbon monoxide had prevented her from completing the flight. She contacted me before her captain upgrade check ride, nervously asking for advice about handling the pressure and expectations that came with left seat responsibility. I shared my own experiences with the transition to command and reminded her that she had already proven herself capable under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Her successful completion of the upgrade brought a message of gratitude and an invitation to fly together once she completed her line training, saying she wanted to learn from the captain who had saved her life and shown her what true professionalism looked like under pressure. The media attention gradually faded as other stories captured public interest, but occasionally a journalist would contact me requesting an anniversary interview or seeking comment on some new aviation incident that seemed superficially similar to mine. I developed a standard response explaining that my situation had been unique and that I preferred to let my actions speak for themselves rather than positioning myself as some kind of expert on emergencies I had experienced only once. The desire for privacy was genuine, but it also reflected my awareness that professional aviators handled emergencies constantly without seeking recognition, and that my case had gained attention primarily due to the unusual circumstances of a flight attendant revealing hidden qualifications rather than anything particularly special about my flying skills. My daughter visited me in Jakarta during her university break, and we had long conversations about career paths, setbacks, and resilience that would have been impossible before my medical certificate suspension forced me to confront my own professional identity. She had watched my struggle with losing my captain position and had seen my determination to maintain connections to aviation even when the path forward seemed uncertain. Now she asked thoughtful questions about how I had maintained confidence during those dark months when my future seemed to hang on medical evaluations beyond my control. I told her honestly that there had been many moments of doubt and frustration, but that staying connected to flying in any capacity had helped me remember who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The Boeing 737-800 became my regular aircraft assignment as I rebuilt my monthly flight hours and re-established my reputation within the airline's pilot community. Each flight brought new passengers who had no knowledge of my history, boarding with the casual trust that travelers extended to uniformed captains without questioning their backgrounds or qualifications. I welcomed them aboard with standard announcements, managed normal departures and arrivals, and handled the occasional minor mechanical issue or weather diversion that constituted routine aviation operations. The ordinary nature of these flights felt simultaneously mundane and precious, reminding me that most flying consisted of professional competence applied to standard procedures rather than dramatic emergencies requiring extraordinary intervention. Training sessions with new first officers gave me opportunities to share lessons learned from my emergency landing without making myself the focus of instruction. When teaching emergency procedures, I emphasized the importance of recognizing subtle warning signs before situations became critical, noting that Captain Santoso and First Officer Kuzuma might have survived without intervention if they had identified their carbon monoxide exposure symptoms earlier. When demonstrating cockpit resource management, I stressed the value of clear communication and crew coordination, explaining how Dewey and Anto's professional support had been essential to successfully managing both the emergency flying and passenger safety during the crisis. The goal was always to help younger pilots develop judgment and skills that would serve them throughout their careers rather than simply recounting my own dramatic story. The airline assigned me to their safety committee based on my emergency experience and my perspective from having worked as both captain and flight attendant. The committee meetings brought together pilots, cabin crew, maintenance personnel, and management to discuss safety issues and develop improved procedures for handling various emergencies. My dual background gave me unique credibility with both flight deck and cabin crew members, allowing me to bridge communication gaps that sometimes emerged between the two groups. When pilots proposed procedures that seemed impractical from a cabin perspective, I could explain the operational realities that flight attendants faced. When cabin crew raised concerns about emergency equipment or procedures, I could translate their observations into technical language that resonated with pilot committee members. One particularly contentious discussion involved revising cockpit access procedures to address scenarios like mine where qualified crew members outside the flight deck might need to assume command during pilot incapacitation. Some pilots argued that existing emergency access codes were sufficient and that creating additional procedures might compromise security. Flight attendants countered that my case demonstrated the need for clearer protocols supporting cabin crew who might possess unexpected qualifications useful during emergencies. I found myself mediating between the positions, acknowledging legitimate security concerns while advocating for procedures that recognize the diverse backgrounds and capabilities that crew members might bring to crisis situations. The solution we eventually developed involved expanding crew training to include scenarios where non-pilot crew members might need to access the cockpit during emergencies, and creating secure documentation procedures that would allow qualified individuals working in non-pilot positions to have their credentials recognized without compromising aircraft security. The new system would have flagged my pilot qualifications to the flight deck crew even though I was working as a flight attendant, potentially enabling earlier coordination if another similar emergency arose. Implementing the changes required coordination with aviation authorities and careful consideration of security implications, but the committee's work demonstrated how individual incidents could drive systemic improvements benefiting the entire industry. My flights gradually extended beyond the Jakarta-Singapore route to include other destinations across Southeast Asia and eventually longer international routes to Australia and the Middle East. Each new route brought different challenges and opportunities to apply the lessons learned from my emergency landing. Flying into Sydney required managing complex arrival procedures through congested airspace where any deviation could create cascade effects for other traffic. Operating into Dubai meant coordinating with some of the world's busiest air traffic control while managing crew rest requirements on ultra-long-range flights. The variety kept me sharp and reminded me why I had fallen in love with professional aviation in the first place. I was just a flight attendant until the cockpit went silent at 10,000 meters and 146 people were in danger, but that crisis revealed I was also a captain who'd retained skills and expertise despite 18 months away, ready to apply knowledge when circumstances demanded intervention only someone with my background could provide. The revelation shocked everyone aboard and transformed my life, but it also saved lives and validated years of training preparing me for exactly that emergency. I had been tested and proven capable, and now I flew again as captain with deeper understanding of aviation safety, crew coordination, and the unexpected ways expertise sometimes emerged when crisis demanded capabilities that seemed impossible based on surface appearances alone. The journey from captain to flight attendant and back to captain had been painful and uncertain, but it had ultimately made me a better pilot, a more empathetic leader, and a stronger advocate for the countless professionals whose hidden capabilities might one day mean the difference between catastrophe and survival at 10,000 meters. Sometimes late at night during long-haul flights, when passengers slept and only the instrument panel lights illuminated the darkened cockpit, I would think about those moments of complete silence that had preceded the emergency. The absence of sound had been more terrifying than any alarm or warning light could have been, a void where human voices and mechanical systems should have created the normal symphony of flight operations. That silence had transformed an ordinary service flight into a test of everything I had learned, everything I had maintained during my forced absence from the flight deck, and everything I believed about my own capabilities under pressure. The emergency had taught me that identity was not simply a job title or a uniform or a certificate issued by aviation authorities. Identity was the sum of skills, experience, and determination that persisted regardless of current circumstances or temporary setbacks. I had remained a pilot even while serving beverages in economy class, had retained my command capability even while my medical certificate sat suspended in some bureaucratic file. The crisis at 10,000 meters had simply revealed what had been there all along, waiting for circumstances that would demand its emergence. My story became part of aviation lore, discussed in training sessions and safety seminars as an example of how diverse crew backgrounds could provide unexpected resources during emergencies. But more importantly, it became a reminder that expertise existed in unexpected places, that professional competence persisted even when circumstances prevented its conventional expression, and that the person serving your coffee might one day save your life when the cockpit goes silent and 146 souls need someone who remembers how to fly.